Let's talk about nostalgia porn. Nostalgia porn is a term that's thrown around a lot these days as millennials age further into their 30s and into their 40s. We're a generation that can't afford to buy a house, so we spend our disposable income on useless tat that reminds us of the better days. We bloody love the stuff that we grew up on as kids, and corporations are very quick to latch on to that and exploit every penny that we have on stuff that we used to love. I mean, look, I'm a man in my mid-30s sat in front of a Sonic the Hedgehog poster from 1991, and I mean, just look at this office. And a lot of the stuff we loved from our childhood doesn't really hold up. I mean, I've got all the Transformers DVDs, I've got them all over there, you can see them in the background, but really if you look back at them, they're a bit cack. Not everything from the 80s was as great as Ready Player One or Stranger Things makes them out to be. We're actually heading into a period of time where 90s is going to become the new nostalgia porn, so expect loads of Netflix series to be set within that time frame, making references to Scream and Clueless. And believe me, I know a thing or two about 90s nostalgia porn. Subscribe to Under Consultation, the Games Master retrospective podcast hosted by Luke Owen. I honestly don't know if this is something that Gen Zers have boomers. Boomers certainly did for the 60s and the 70s, but not to the degree that Gen Xers and Millennials did and still do. Wrestling fans, and particularly WWE, have their own brand of nostalgia porn. It's called the Attitude Era. A period of time that's had countless DVDs released on it, books written, network specials, and even entire episodes of Raw have been dedicated to the memory and nostalgic love of the Attitude Era. But even outside of that, on week-to-week television, it feels like the names of Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Ethel get roared up on commentary and in promos all the time. Wrestlers of today reminiscing about the good old days when Raw was drawing 6 million people a week rather than 1.5. A time when wrestlers weren't just wrestlers but legit celebrities, appearing in TV show cameos, on the covers of magazines, being interviewed on TV and taken seriously. This was all certainly helped by the fact that it wasn't just WWE that was hot with Steve Austin and The Rock, because WCW had the NWO, Goldberg and Sting, and ECW was providing a real alternative to fans who thought Vince McMahon and Ted Turner's products were too tame. Wrestling was the hottest thing on the planet, and WWE still constantly pined for those days. Even though business-wise they're doing much better now financially than they ever have been, the Attitude Era is held as like the gold standard. But kind of like the conversation we had about CM Punk last week, is this something we should look back on fondly, or is it only good with the nostalgia goggles? Is the Attitude Era actually good? But in order to really answer this, we need to define what the Attitude Era actually is, and the only way to do that is with science. Right, okay, let's do some science. Let's science this. Oh, right, it's time to science this. Oh, does that make sense? Science? No, no, no. For this we need history. Yes, no, that's good. I feel much more historically accurate now as we go through the history portion of this show. Okay, right, so according to the WWE Network, Attitude Era, the 15th of December, day after my birthday, 1997, when I turned 12. I turned 12. Survivor Series 1997 is also when apparently it started. WWE have also said in documentaries that it started at King of the Ring 1996 with that Austin 316 promo. What's the next one? There have also been those that claim that it started at WrestleMania 14, at the start of the Austin era. I've left a gap there because other people have claimed that it started January 18th, 1998 with the Mike Tyson angle, with the Tyson Austin, etc, etc. So far we've got 1990. Anyway, there's more to go. Vince Russo, whose opinion matters about as much as mine, has said that it started, let me put this up here, with the debut of Goldust in August 1995. Other WWE documentaries have said that it started with Pillman's Got a Gun, November 4th, 1996, which came after King of the Ring. Now, Bret Hart, who some people have said completely missed the Attitude Era, has also been credited for creating the Attitude Era with his "frustrated even a goddamn word for it," which is March 1997. Where does this go? March 1997, it goes right there. And some people have even claimed that it was the start of D-Generation, I'm going to have to put that there, D-Generation X on August 11th, 1997. And by some people, I mean Triple H and Shawn Michaels. Literally no one else thinks this. Apparently, the Attitude Era can start from anywhere from August 1995 through to WrestleMania. That last one? WrestleMania in March in 1998. So any point here could have been the actual start of the Attitude Era. But the question is, oh, this is hot. I might actually have to say, if I take this off, is it going to reveal that it's not actually a real shirt? Fun fact, people, like if I undo this, hold on, it just stops. Look at this, look, it's like I look like a Bella. We now know, at least we think we know when it started, but when did it end? Some people will say that it was WrestleMania X7 in 2001, because that is when Stone Cold Steve Austin turned heel, WCW was dead, ECW was dead, and everyone stopped watching wrestling. So a good claim as to why that is the end of the Attitude Era. Others, kind of myself included, feel it's a little bit later with Survivor Series 2001, because that had the Team WWF versus Team WCW and ECW match. Shane McMahon's in this match. The invasion was f***ing stupid. I also could see the argument for it ending at Vengeance 2001 a month later, because this is when WWF officially retired the WCW Championship. Like this for me is the actual official death of WCW. It's the last time the WCW title was defended. Lastly, there are those that think that it ended in May 2002. This is when WWF stopped becoming WWF. They got the F out and became WWE, and they started the Ruthless Aggression Era. They stopped using Attitude altogether. So here's what we know. The Attitude Era began between 1995, August 1995, and March 1998. And it ended between, I think, April 2001 and May 2002. So, did that clear anything up for anyone? I don't know. I mean, maybe it did. Got to take this off. Take off my in a real cravat. The time frame of this is important because we need to know what it is exactly that people are praising. When I talk to people about their memories of the Attitude Era, it's the stars that they bring up. Steve Austin, The Rock, Mankind, Undertaker, Kane, Chris Jericho, Eddie Guerrero, Chyna, Triple H, Hardy Boys, Dudley Boys, Edge and Christian, Trish Stratus, Lita, D'Lo Brown, APA, Right to Censor. The list honestly goes on and on and on. I didn't even scratch the surface of the big names from the time. It always seemed that even when certain stars were being cycled out, there was a whole new crop waiting to take their place. No one ever felt stale, and Monday Night Raw, particularly between 1998 and 2000, felt like must-see television. Which is why they were able to air a 21-minute segment with Rock and Mankind that was almost pointless, and it was the highest rated moment of the entire Attitude Era. Bear in mind that 21 minutes is basically an entire episode of Friends without the ad breaks. But the story between Rock and Mankind was incredibly heartwarming, and the characters were so good that it's impossible to take your eyes off it and switch over to something else. This is what people love and remember fondly. It's Austin versus McMahon, it's The Rock turning heel and becoming the corporate champion, it's Triple H marrying Stephanie and then Steph turning her back on her dad to form the McMahon-Helmsley regime, it's Mick Foley as commissioner, the debut of Kane, the tag feud between the Dudleys, Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys, the Chyna and Eddie stuff, the hardcore 24/7 rule, corporate ministry. It really feels you could pick any point in the Attitude Era, load it up on the network, and it will have a good storyline on there. Well, mostly, but we will get onto that. If you've watched this show before, or you've followed me on Twitter, you'll know that I posted a poll asking if you think the Attitude Era is actually good, which we'll get to in a little bit, but one of the common threads of thought was that the in-ring quality of the Attitude Era was actually bad. This possibly stems from changing wrestling styles. The 80s style feels different to the late 90s, it feels different to the mid-2000s, that feels different to the current day. But are we really going to sit here and say that the TLC matches were bad, that Rock vs Triple H at Backlash 2000 was bad, that Triple H vs Cactus Jack at the Rumble was bad, that Michaels vs Undertaker inside Hell in a Cell was bad in-ring action? And that seems insane to me. Like, not every match was 5 stars, but then again, not every match today is 5 stars. Was the in-ring quality of the Attitude Era so bad that it prompted this many people to say the same thing? Clean my car today, did you notice? Let's do some science. You didn't really think I was going to do this video without going through some science, did you? You all missed it with the CM Punk episode, so I've gone through some science. I've gone through the star ratings, like the Charlotte Flair video, looking at WrestleMania in particular because it's the biggest night of the year. However, historically, the Attitude Era doesn't really fare well with WrestleMania. People don't tend to remember them. They remember the moments. Fun, you know, Austin winning the title, Austin turning heel, TLC, etc. But people don't tend to, the hardcore triple threat, people don't really rate the matches very highly. And I think that's kind of reflected because WrestleMania 14, the first one of our Attitude Era, and of course you believe Vince Russo, of course, is a star and 3/4. That's not a good start. WrestleMania 15 either, because that gets a star and 1/4, which is, I mean, that's really bad. It's a McMahon in every corner and a bull match in every corner as well. A pay-per-view, a WrestleMania with not a singles match on it. WrestleMania 2000, again, star and 1/4 for WrestleMania 2000. So we've not even broken the 2-star barrier yet. WrestleMania X7, thought to be one of the greatest WWF pay-per-views of all time, right? T to B, top to bottom, thought to be one of the best WrestleManias ever. It's even got a near perfect, it's like 4 3/4 star match between Benoit and Angle. Plus you've got Austin, and you've got Rock, and you've got TLC, TLC 2 I believe it was, and you've got, of course, the hardcore triple threat. So WrestleMania X7, greatest WrestleMania of all time, 2.5 stars. 2.5 stars. Deary me. And then let's look at WrestleMania X8, which has got Rock Hogan on the card and a terrible main event between Triple H and Jericho. 1.5 for WrestleMania X8. So, oof magoof. That's not great. Do you know what that is? That is an average star rating of 1 3/4 for WrestleMania. To try and give it some comparison, let's see what the competition were doing, and let's look at WCW's equivalent of WrestleMania, Starrcade. Here we go, Starrcade 1996, already off to a better start, 2.5 stars. Their first one, 1996, it's got 2.5 stars, absolutely walked it. Nope, 1997, 3/4 of a star, 3/4 of a bloody star for Starrcade 97. This is the one with Sting Hogan on it. Year later, Starrcade 1998, 2.25 stars, so that's going in the right direction. Starrcade 1999, however, is 1.25 stars, 2.25 stars finally for Starrcade 2000, the last proper Starrcade, not WWE's bull house show version, proper Starrcade. 2.25 stars there for Starrcade. I suddenly realised that I've not done any maths for this one. Hold on. The iPad doesn't have a calculator on it. I have to use Google. Got some maths, folks. It's okay. I've done it now. This, 1 3/4 stars. This, 1 3/4 stars. Huh, did you look at that? Was wrestling just not as good then? Like, is it not as good as I remember it being? Is it literally more that it was just about the characters and the storylines as opposed to the actual wrestling, which I suppose could be a good argument? Because, like, you know, look at this. One of my all-time favourite pay-per-views from this era, Backlash 2000, it's got 2 3/4 stars. I mean, it's better than WrestleMania, but it's not exactly, it's not blow-away stuff, is it? But maybe it's not just an Attitude Era problem, maybe it's just a WWE problem, because I looked at WrestleMania 35, last year's WrestleMania, the Dave Meltzer star ratings for that, and it was 2.5 stars. It's still not, like, amazing, considering that everyone says, you know, now is the best era of wrestling ever. It's still only 2.5 stars for WrestleMania last year, which was actually a pretty good, it was bloody long, but it was a pretty good show. So where does this argument come from that wrestling is better now? NXT TakeOver Brooklyn has got an average star rating of, you know, TakeOver Brooklyn, the couple of nights before this one, has an average star rating of 4.5 stars. It was a near perfect show. And if you're going to argue, Big Rook 42316, I'll see you in the comments. If you're going to argue that Meltzer has got some vendetta against WWE or WrestleMania, or you want to pull the Tokyo Dome argument nonsense, New Japan Dominion, this is the show with the Okada Omega 4 7-star match. So 7 stars, but the show average 4 stars, which is less than Brooklyn's 4.5. I suppose what we have found out is that WrestleManias from the Attitude Era were a bit cack. But then again, so were Starrcades from the time. Backlash was a little bit better, but you know, WrestleMania hasn't really been great for 20 years apparently. Maybe this proves something. Honestly, I just don't know anymore. But even in that science, Rock vs. Mankind is a great example of a bad match being lifted highly by great crowd reaction. If Drew McIntyre and Seth Rollins went out there today and did the exact same match, it would not get the same reaction. That's nothing against McIntyre and Rollins, they're just not the same level of stars that Rock and Hogan were. And they wouldn't go out there and have the exact same match, they would do something that's actually way better. But WWE haven't allowed them to position themselves as those sorts of top stars. Realistically, John Cena is the only star that's comparable to The Rock and Steve Austin, and I think it can be argued that he's become a bigger star outside of WWE than he was in their walls. If anything, they probably held down his potential. So, I don't know, was the Attitude Era actually good?
So here's the thing about the Attitude Era, it's like a game of two halves. You have 98 to sort of mid 99, and it's qualitatively not very good to garbage. Like, it is just a bit of a dumpster fire. The matches aren't very exciting, the storylines that have a chance to go beyond a couple of weeks before being forgotten about are kind of cringe. And then you get to late 99 and the entirety of 2000, right the way up to WrestleMania X7, and it is legitimately everything that we love about wrestling, like soap opera storylines, technical brilliance.
If it weren't for the Attitude Era and all the crazy stuff they were doing and the wild characters they were showing every week, I very likely would not have become a fan or stayed a fan for as long as I have. So I credit that time period with being a very formative period for me as a wrestling fan.
Everyone talks about Money in the Bank 2011. Everyone talks about, oh my God, that crowd made that match brilliant. That crowd was at every single Attitude Era show. People cared that much about the characters and about the kind of crazy weekly TV. It was just exciting. Plus Raw was 2 hours long, which helps.
The match quality in your main event is so high, but on your mid-card, it's so low. Nothing compared to the mid-card matches we get in, say, AEW or NXT today. It's insane. So while the Attitude Era, I think, was also the best time in wrestling, I think in a lot of ways it's also kind of one of the worst.
The thing a lot of us fans don't want to admit is that the glue that really held us all together, the most gripping element of that kind of 2000s heyday, was the McMahon-Helmsley regime. The Kurt, Triple H and Stephanie love triangle was so good. The McMahon drama was so interesting. The interpersonal relationships.
I think the Attitude Era is best known for doing a lot of different and innovative things to get fans to watch and see what they were doing on television, things that wrestling companies had never really done before or since, and in some cases, rightfully so, because quite frankly, a lot of what they did in the Attitude Era did not age very well.
What Brian mentioned in his video is something that actually got brought up a lot in the Twitter responses to the poll. Because although Yes won by 76.3%, a lot of the replies brought up those bad storylines.
If by good you mean entertaining in the way watching fail videos is entertaining, then yes. If you mean good as in a constant output of high quality matches and quality storytelling, not so much.
It featured 5 to 6 of the most entertaining wrestlers of all time at their peaks, and everything else was kind of really bad when you go back on it.
The great stuff was as good as wrestling has ever been, but the bad stuff was the worst wrestling has ever been too.
There was a lot of really top quality stories at the time, but the quality of wrestling was a lot lower, and when the stories were bad, they was really bad.
Produced many great moments, but for all the good, there is plenty of bad they it produced.
The more I go back and watch of it, the more I realize how desperate and cheap a lot of the angles were.
And it's true, there is a lot of bad in the Attitude Era. For every good moment that I listed earlier, there's 3 to 4 moments that you could say were at best nonsense and downright offensive at worst. Trish Stratus being made to bark like a dog, DX doing blackface, Beaver Cleavage being a character based on incest that transitioned into a poor taste wife-beating angle, chopping off Val Venus's dick, PMS doing a faked miscarriage, Hawk's alcohol abuse, Bossman making Al Snow eat his own dog, Mark Henry and Sammy, DX pretending to rape Stephanie McMahon. The list goes on and on. I've not even touched on the treatment of women, using them as nothing but sex symbols to wrestling gravy for the lads to have a collective wank over, while Jerry Lawler screamed about puppies ad nauseum. And that's just the tasteless stuff. Like, there's also all those dumb storylines like the Howard Power, Moppy, Mae Young giving birth to a hand, the Union, the Invasion, who ran over Stone Cold Steve Austin. WWE gets criticised a lot nowadays for its week-to-week booking and throwing stuff against a wall and seeing what sticks, but really the Attitude Era was no different. And it's that car crash booking that actually kept people watching. This response on Twitter from Hector really sums it up for me. It's all relative. 2020 me, who understands racism, sexism, homophobia, wouldn't want that crap on TV, but I wouldn't be watching today without it. And really what WWF was doing, particularly the shocking stuff, was just a product of its time. The 90s was this rebellious age where Gen Xers took over TV with irreverent ideas that were meant to shock the system. Howard Stern made a name for himself by pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable on public radio. Jerry Springer made an entire career off the back of exploiting people for saying weird stuff on television. South Park made headlines because it featured swearing children and a singing poo. Tom Green was inexplicably popular around this time and could have only existed in this period of time. It wasn't just the US either. We had shows like The Word that featured this guy drinking his own sick because
I'll do anything to get on TV.
The Howard Stern movie Private Parts kind of embellishes a lot of what Howard Stern actually did during the time, but this scene really does sum up the attitude towards him and therefore the attitude towards a lot of popular culture in the late 90s.
The average radio listener listens for 18 minutes. The average Howard Stern fan listens for, are you ready for this? An hour and 20 minutes. How can that be? Answer most commonly given, I want to see what he'll say next. All right, okay. Fine, but what about the people who hate Stern? Good point. The average Stern hater listens for 2.5 hours a day. No, but if they hate him, why do they listen? Most common answer, I want to see what he'll say next.
A lot of the Attitude Era has dated badly, but then again so's a lot of TV, music, and movies from that time period. Nostalgia goggles can only carry you so far. Video games are still wicked, by the way. If you do want to learn more about the Attitude Era, I highly recommend watching Brian Zane's video work because he's done amazing stuff on this topic. I'd also recommend Brian Alvarez's weekly WWF vs WCW reviews that he did over on Wrestling Observer with Brian and Vinny, and of course, the AE Podcast Boys have got an incredible back catalogue that reviewed every pay-per-view from the time and even some of the TV shows to really dive into whether it holds up or not. So, I guess in conclusion, the Attitude Era was a bit of a mixed bag. It's looked on fondly now because it had big names doing big named things and millions of people were watching it and paying millions of dollars to either see the shows live or even just buy a piece of merchandise. The in-ring quality wasn't there as we've discussed, but then again the TV matches were only like 2 minutes including entrances, so it's kind of hard to tell a good in-ring story. But if you were to ask a random dorm kid from the time who was watching Raw on a weekly basis as to why they watched it, they wouldn't be talking about the wrestling, they'd be talking about the characters and the storylines. But was it actually good? I don't know on this one. The bad does outweigh the good, and while without it I probably wouldn't be here talking to you fine people as a wrestling fan, I don't think I can look back on it as fondly as I once did. I've kind of grown up. This may seem like a cop-out answer, and I do apologize for that, but if you to ask me the question in 1999 and 2000, I would say 100% yes, but if you're to ask me in 2020, I think I've got to say no. No, I don't think it was actually good.
My favorite match of the Attitude Era, there's no debate. Hell in a Cell, Undertaker, Mankind, King of the Ring, 1998. It is probably the most emblematic match of the time that you could possibly think of. It is shocking, it is brutal at times, but you cannot look away from that match. A distant second place for me, though, would have to be the street fight with Triple H and Cactus Jack, the Royal Rumble 2000.
I thought about it, and oh no, it's Vince versus Shane, WrestleMania X7. I care about wrestling as a crowd sport. I don't care as much about moves. You know, moves are cool, but I care about it in terms of like fan reactions and like big payoffs to big stupid storylines. And there's no bigger payoff than Linda rising from her chair and then Mick Foley just rounding on him, and then the kick into the trash can, and then the 1, 2, 3, like absolute stupid wrestling perfection.